Hello and welcome back to Ride Rescue. Hopefully you can see this. There's a nasty scuff on the lens of the headlight. That can be sanded out. It's pretty deep. So I'm going to start with a 320 sandpaper, and if that doesn't cut it, then I'll jump up to a 220 and then I'll drop back down and I'll go all the way down to probably a 5,000 grit, and then I'll be able to buff it. Seems kind of crazy to sand a lens like this with 320, even 220, but I've done it, and it's a good way to save a very expensive headlight. This headlight I think retails for close to $900. I bought this one on eBay with this bad scuff in it for a fraction of that cost. I think I ended up paying about $300 with shipping for this headlight. And that's the only damage on the whole headlight. Nothing else, none of the brackets or anything else is damaged. Yeah, this is coming out okay with 320. No sense in risking deep scratches with the 220. So that looks pretty nasty now. Sanding it with 320. I will sand it with 500 at this point, and I'll go with the wet. And that'll take out the majority of those scratches. Then I'll just keep going all the way out to, like I said, about 5,000 grit. One of the mistakes I made in the past when doing something like this is when I start out with a heavy grit and then gradually go back, not making sure to get all of that deep scratch out before you move on to the next step. If I was to sand this with 500 and then go to an 800 and then go to 1,000 grit sandpaper, if I'm not making sure that this 500 is able to completely knock down that 320, if I was to leave any of that 320 scratch, I can go all the way to 5,000 and it looks like they're not there, but then you buff it and all of a sudden they show up. So you got to make sure to really sand and look closely at the sand scratch and make sure that you've gotten all of that out. You still see a little bit here where I went a little too far with the 320. If you look close, you can see where I sanded quite a ways with that first sanding with the 320. And see the halo? There's a coating of film, like a clear coat on the headlight. I don't know if it was layers of different plastics, but at this point, if you haven't done this before and you see that, you'd be panicked that you've just ruined it. I can get rid of that. It may end up showing all the way to the 5,000 sand scratch, and if that's the case, then I will go back to a 1,000 grit sandpaper, scuff up the whole headlight, and clear coat it. So I've had this happen before. It's a little scary. The first time it happens, you think you've just ruined a very expensive headlight, but I'll show you how to fix it. Now at this point, once I go to a 1,000 grit or a 1,200 grit sandpaper, I want to make sure my scratches are always going in the same direction. I want them to be horizontal with the ground, with the horizon. If I go the other way, if I go vertically, those scratches sometimes show up in the light as you look across the finish. If you go horizontally, they have a tendency to disappear. Now you can really see that halo effect where I've gone through a layer, and if I spray this with water it'll really show up. That's a pretty drastic fade area. And you can see right through the headlight where it's wet, but you can't see through it here. Also, if I look really close, I can see a little bit of a scuff here and a little bit of the original scuff here. So I'm going to have to sand this down just a little bit further in order to get rid of those two scuff marks. Okay, this sand scratch is looking really good now. As far as I can tell, it's all pretty consistent with the 1200 grit sanding scratches. That halo is really getting dominant now, but it's all looking really smooth. The two scuff marks are completely gone now. This is where I would normally go to a 2000 grit sandpaper or even a 2500 grit sandpaper, but I'm out. And I ordered some. I do have 3000 grit sandpaper, so I'm going to use that. It takes a little bit more effort to get that 1200 grit sand scratch to disappear with 3000. As far as I can tell, it looks like all of that 1200 grit sand scratch is gone. Maybe just a little bit more along here. Yeah, a little bit here too. I will sand this just a little bit more, and then I have a 5000 grit sanding sponge that I'll finish this with, and then we'll see how this halo looks. The way it's looking right now after 3000 grit, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to clear coat this lens in order to get that to disappear, because it seems to have taken off some type of a coating that is over this. I don't know whether it's another layer of plastic or some type of a sealer, or if it is just a clear coat, but I have a feeling this is always going to show if I don't give this all a consistent coat of something like a clear. Now you can see with it wet, it's crystal clear. It looks absolutely fantastic. But as it dries, I can see the finish is all scuffed off. By wetting it like this and looking across it, I know I've got the finish where I want it when it comes to having it perfectly smooth and all of the sand scratch smoothed out. Typically what I would do at this point is polish it. I'd hit it with a buffer and buff the whole area really good with a wool pad with a good, not a heavy cut, but a fine cut to smoothen it all out. It will leave buffing swirl marks on it, and then I will use another pad like a foam pad and go with a real fine finishing polish or a swirl remover, and then I would give it a couple of good coats of wax and really seal it up. But I have plans for this. And I don't plan on taking this back to stock. So I want to make this look as good as possible, just so that it'll pass inspection, because I do have to get this truck inspected since it has a salvage title and it's from out of state. So at this point, I'm going to take a chance that maybe this will disappear if I use swirl remover and a show glaze. The show glaze is a really good sealer. It's a pre-wax type of a glaze that you put on and then you wax it. I don't want to wax this because I am planning on using a clear on it, but I just want to see what these two products will do. Wow, that is beautiful. It brought it right back to brand new. So in this case, there'd be no reason to clear coat this. Put a good sealer and a wax on it. good as new. I purchased this taillight off of eBay, and it had a pretty big scrape in the edge here and a couple other scrapes, and it has a hairline crack right along this seam. That crack will be pretty easy to just fill in with like a clear coat. And there was another scuff right here. So I sanded these deep ones out. I was really hoping that I could get it deep enough without changing the whole look of the lens. I sanded that with 320, and I was able to keep the contour. You can't even tell. I mean, I shaved probably a 1/16 of an inch off of this area. So now what I'm doing is I went from 320 sandpaper to 500 grit sandpaper to 1,000 grit sandpaper. Now I'm at 2,000 grit, and then I just keep watching to make sure that each time I sand that it gets rid of the previous scratches. Each time I step up to a finer grit, I go further from the area that needed the work so that I can keep blending, and little by little I'll end up with pretty much sanding the whole lens, and then when I buff it, it will all look the same, and if I can't get it to buff up, then I'll just clear coat it. Okay, now it's the true test. It's not going to have that deep, glorious shine, but I shouldn't be seeing any scratches of any kind. Yeah, now it's perfectly smooth. I don't see any scratches. You can just see that hairline crack that I'll need to seal up. So at this point, if it wasn't for the crack, I would just polish this. But I have different plans. Now that I've showed you how to do it, but because of this crack, and I want to seal it with a clear coat, I'm going to go back and resand this whole thing, scuff it all up with 1,000 grit sandpaper, use a scouring pad to get down into this edge, and then I'm going to clear coat this, but I'm going to mix in a little bit of black. So rather than putting a tint on them, I mean, there's several tints you can buy that just cover up the reverse light area. You can buy sprays that are fairly dark, and you can darken out the tail lights. I'm not after that look. I just want a real subtle tint. Now some of the Rebels have a black outline, and this is black. Well, there's a sensor in here, so I have to be really careful on how dark I can go. But I want to go with the darker outline around the outside, and then just a mist of black to just give it that smoky black look. But then, like I said, go darker around the edge. I'll show you that when I get to it. I'll be doing both tail lights. But I'm really happy. I saved half price off of this. I think these retail for about $650, $700. They're just crazy expensive because of this little crack and the big scuff mark it had in it. I got it for $250. So, hell of a savings. I'm really just getting down now to the finishing touches. Putting the fender well in, putting the fender flare on, all four corners. And it's just a few miscellaneous pieces. I'm really excited about this one. This was cracked and very beat up. I mean, this whole truck got sideswiped, and both of this side were pretty beat up. These were close to $100 a piece. I saved them. I'm real excited about being able to save a couple $100. The fender's so flimsy. You want to just bend the fender. Sounds like they're all snapped in and pretty well bottomed out. It's not loose. Now it's just a matter of putting all the bolts in around the fender well. And this one's done. This piece buttons up across the bottom with a few bolts. I decided, since the truck's out, for all you clean freaks, I washed it all down really good. Sprayed everything with simple green, let it soak in real good, and then hosed it off. Since this truck's almost new, it cleans up pretty easy. Things you have to do when you work alone. Ram has landed. I just gotta crawl underneath it and put in 6 bolts and the filler neck and wiring and. Thanks for checking out my channel. I'm here to learn, to teach, and hopefully to inspire. So hit my subscribe button. I really appreciate you subscribing. Leave me a comment. I love hearing from you. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a like. Thanks again for watching.